friends. My name is Stephanie Romero, and I am the founder and executive director of Awaken Pittsburgh. I want to welcome you to our podcast, The Ripple Effect. Awaken Pittsburgh is a nonprofit dedicated to fostering well-being, empathy, and compassion for all by teaching and encouraging mindfulness and meditation practices. I also want to take a moment to let you know that Awaken Pittsburgh offers many other opportunities for practice and connection. For example, you can join our online community, which features a space to more deeply explore the topics we cover with our guests. We have weekly posts to spark thought, practice, and reflection. I hope you will come join us to explore, connect with others, and deepen your practice. You can find out more at awakenpittsburgh.org. In this episode of The Ripple Effect, I'm really excited to be in conversation with David Wible. David is an entrepreneur, instructor, and the founder of Brave Cave, a community dedicated to helping high achievers thrive using his F4 framework: fitness, focus, fraternity, and finance. He is the author of F4, the High Achiever's Handbook, and the creator of Vision Builder 2025, a structured program designed to help individuals align their goals with purposeful action. Through his instructing events and podcasts, David empowers people to break through barriers and achieve sustainable success. David's professional background includes working with executives, startups, and organizations to develop scalable revenue strategies, leadership effectiveness, and high-performance habits. His mission is to make the F4 program free for high achievers by securing sponsorships that align with its core pillars. He is passionate about building community, fostering resilience, and guiding individuals to live with intention. David, I'm so excited to talk to you today. I know we only met in the last, month or two, but I felt a resonance when we've met and talked, and I'm really excited to go a little deeper today on the podcast. So welcome.
I'm excited too. Great. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what a cup of coffee can do.
I know. I always say I will have a cup of coffee with anyone because you never know where it's going to end up, right?
That's right.
Well, I would love for you first just to share part of your journey with the folks that are listening. You have had a really interesting career that has led you to a very specific thing right now. And maybe you could give the elevator pitch of who you are and how you got
Yeah.
where you are.
Oh, I would love to. I'll keep it really super brief. I always joke and say anytime you're from Pittsburgh, everybody thinks you started in manufacturing, and maybe that's where you still are, right? And for me, it actually did start in manufacturing. So I spent 13 years in heavy industrial manufacturing, both in compression and tensile testing, as well as the plastic sheet and film industry. Did that through the 90s, then got into kind of the trend that was going on in regards to the dot-com bubble bursting. And so I was a part of a private labeled e-commerce company in the early 2000s, and then moved into international e-commerce, so helping consumers who are from a different country be able to buy from retailers here in the United States. And then from there, I actually started a digital media company back in 2007. It was a SaaS platform before things were called SaaS. It helped control the content that goes on video walls, kiosks, and digital signs. So those TVs that are in public places, whether they're a menu or a gigantic video wall, we had a software that could actually control all the content that was on those devices. Ran that company for about 14 years, which kind of fast forwarded me into almost COVID time. So just before COVID hit, I signed a letter of intent to sell that company to a large private equity company. and thankfully went through that journey and came out the other side um, with a pretty nice chunk of change. And that's what really kind of led me to where I am now. What was weird to me is I spent all of those years, decades, going after a goal, which was, successfully selling companies and hopefully at some point getting to a point where you had enough money that you didn't have to worry about some things as much as you usually did. Weirdly enough for me though, Stephanie, was the day after that money hit my bank, I felt more stress and was still sitting in the same seat I was, but now I didn't have a purpose and I really didn't feel like I knew what I was supposed to do because I had been fighting for decades. And now I was lost. And it just completely blew my mind that you could go for a goal and, as let's call it, a high achiever, get that goal and feel worse than you did when you were trying to go for it, right? And so that led me to where I am now, which is trying to figure out a framework for high achievers so they don't get in that same spot that I was in.
Yeah, that I just am curious, now here you are trying to support others and not kind of crashing, right? So
Yes.
what's your strategy? Like what did you come to for yourself as the way to regain balance and find purpose?
Yeah, I think the first thing for me was I had to kind of sit in that desperate feeling for a little while. And then I started to think about some of the great books I've read, some of the great seminars I've gone to, some of the great coaches I've had, and started to look at just pieces of the things that I learned. And then recognizing that even though I did all of that, not many of them gave me a framework or a way to kind of go after it and approach it. And so spent a good 12 to 18 months figuring out how would I measure this, right? And where did I maybe go wrong? And I fell on this thing I call the F4. You'll if you read the book, you'll start to recognize I love acronyms because I think it just helps me remember things. And so F4 stands for fitness, focus, fraternity, and finance. And those are the four quadrants when I think about my life or attacking the day. I put it in that context. And that's what really started to help me. I started to work with other, what I consider business owners at first, and started to apply some of the principles that I learned in each one of these quadrants. And it started to resonate, right? And so formalized the F4 framework, came out with a handbook. And that's what kind of got me on this journey.
Yeah, and so I'm curious because I know this is the conversation we started having and what connected us, where mindfulness fits in your F4 framework. Where do you see that connecting in? Because I actually see a couple of, well, multiple ways. Maybe that's what we could break down a little here.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, what led me to you was one of the areas that was probably the hardest for me as kind of a fast charging entrepreneur going after these goals was the quadrant I think about Awaken Pittsburgh the most in, which is what I call focus. Focus for me is the white space, right? Giving yourself an opportunity to disconnect. I always tell people that I talk to about the F4 framework. You may call this meditation. You may call it prayer. If either of those freak you out, you can call it chair time. It can be a variety of things, but I always encourage the folks that I work with just to disconnect, whatever that looks like for you. It could be reading, it could be stretching on top of just disconnecting from the day-to-day life. And that's where I really see, and what drove me to you is, I'm a generalist at this stuff. I'm not an expert, and that's what obviously led me to reach out and get that cup of coffee.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious if you have a particular thing that you've landed on for yourself, that is your practice that's helping you.
Absolutely. I always say it's really really healthy to have good bookends to your day, right? And so for me, in the morning, I have a routine that I go through every morning. It starts out with probably like most people, a cup of coffee, and then once I have that cup of coffee, I go down to the gym and make certain that I have a very specific cardio routine I get going so I can get a good sweat on at the beginning of the day. I then go into some weight training. So every single day has a muscle group that I attack. And then I go into my focus routine. And so my focus routine sometimes changes a bit, but for the most part, it's fairly consistent in regards to I first just kind of sit there quietly. Sometimes I'll do red light therapy along with just kind of sitting quietly. Then I'll watch typically something motivational from a video perspective, which seems probably counterintuitive to disconnecting, but it's just something that for me gives me gets kind of things going. And then we'll do a little bit of light reading. Usually I'll pick a theme for the week or the month that I want to lean on a little bit. And then from that, I have a series of stretches that I do. And then I conclude by going back to just kind of sitting quietly and kind of getting myself back into going after or attacking the day. And usually that'll take anywhere from well, it depends. If my mind is super busy, it may be 5 minutes. My ideal time is somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes. If I'm in that window, I know I've had a pretty good morning focus routine. I time every one of my routines just to kind of figure out if my mind's busy or if in a good spot.
I really love the idea of something inspirational as part of that. We've been working in workplaces, and we work in a lot of spaces where there's a lot of burnout. And one of the things that we really try to support people in is reconnecting with what inspires them, right? Reconnecting with what brings them joy, reconnecting with what motivates them, because burnout is like your battery's depleted, right? And so I love that you are building into your daily routine something inspirational. So I don't know if usually I ask people on every podcast something they could share. So is there something like either a video or a reading that you could maybe share that is uh, one of your go-to
Yeah,
inspirational things?
yeah, I do. I affectionately say I like to take myself to the spa every single morning, and so in conclusion of my of that entire routine is just a very quick journal exercise. And again, you'll see this ongoing theme with these acronyms, but SPA for me is a way to prime myself for the day because I can't really control what I dreamt or what's swimming around in my head. And so I came up with this methodology to kind of get me as right as I possibly can be. And so the S stands for state. And I say I'm going to prime my state after all of the working out and in the focus routine. And state is nothing more than what am I grateful for, and it can be a word, it could be a phrase, it could be a quick paragraph. I'm not a big journaler, so this is usually kind of condensed down to maybe 3 lines at best. The P stands for purpose. So why am I doing all of the stuff that I'm doing? What is my main driver as me? And then finally, what is that one activity I'm going to get done today, no matter what, right? No matter what happens, there's going to be one thing that's kind of the dominant thought or dominant activity that I know I got to do. I write that down, and then it's not as it doesn't fit in the acronym real well to call it the SPA V, but V is my value statement, and so usually it's 3 words. that resonate most with me, and I write those down as well. So every single day, in the gym after focus, I have just a manual journal that I keep track of my workouts, but most importantly, I write down my spa.
I love that. I love that. And you had mentioned the book ending. So is what's the thing at the end of the day?
So usually for me, it's some sort of stretch. It's a physical activity just to kind of, if I can, get out any residual stress or energy that's in my body. Right now, my favorite go-to is what's called a Gibbon board, a Gibbon board, which is a more of a balance routine. But it's good for core as well. So the evenings are a little more free flow, a lot more fun. Not quite as regimented, but it's typically an activity done still in my kind of my designated fitness area.
That's awesome. I feel like you are doing a great job in your practice of integrating like mind, body, and emotion, right? You're hitting all three of those, and sometimes I tend to be too brainiac and forget about the somatic quality of practice, right? I intentionally got my yoga teacher certification so that I could be more embodied, like to learn how to do that. So I love that you really seem to be in touch with the need of being embodied and having a practice that includes the physical. So that's really great to hear.
Well, I'm not young, right? And so what I find a lot is injuries come a lot faster than they used to come to me, and so especially for me, um, flexibility and stretching was really needed to be incorporated into my life, just so I could do more of the things I wanted to do. So I think that just became a necessity. It was one of those factors that I had to do it if I wanted to keep active.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. But it's also it it makes sense for the physicality, but from a mindfulness perspective, like when we're in touch with our body, it keeps us in the present moment.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, and I also found so early on in my life, in my early 20s, I suffered from panic attacks, and one of the big things that I found that could to get that at bay, aside from just better nutrition, was also exercise, right? Just kind of spending some of that energy out, and so as the years ticked on, I realized like that was really a great component. That's why I put physical exercise ahead of my focus routine. Is it gives me a chance. Not only have I been in bed for a number of hours, so it's probably better to get the body moving, but also if I am hyper focused or thinking about something in particular, I've burned through a good portion of that in my fitness. So it allows me to really kind of focus in when it's time to really just get with my thoughts.
Yeah, and you're naming something really important without naming it, both when you talked about your end of the day and what you just described, that like our emotions are in our bodies and we can work the emotions out sometimes through the body.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, because I'm more always in my head, sometimes think about my emotions as partly my thinking, but actually, like your emotions affect your whole body. We have a physical response to fear, to stress, to anger, all of those things. And so, movement and different kinds of exercise, yoga, can help us work through that. So I love that you're bringing in the physical aspects of the practice, and I'm also grateful for you sharing and appreciate the vulnerability of your panic attacks, because I think a lot of folks come to these practices because they have things like panic attacks, right? They're
Yeah.
having those things and they're not sure how to deal with them. And so, naming that that's in your body and you can work it through in your body in part. It's not just thinking, right?
Without a doubt. Well, and I can tell you my focus, now in the, let's say, the back half of my life or my career is that vulnerability is very, very important to me, because I want to work with high achievers. And what I find with those folks is, either A, they suppress those negative feelings because they see it as them being weak. But more importantly, people pass them by, right? There's an awful lot of focus on people who hit hard times or go through something very, very traumatic, not recognizing that there are high achievers out there that don't recognize that they too will have a dark day, and that they too will suffer from imposter syndrome. No matter how much success they have, they're still going to have this demon talking bad to them. And so it's important for me, I feel like, especially in what I'm doing, to be vulnerable, so that people recognize that, you could have some great accomplishments, but you're still not going to wake up every day feeling great.
Yeah, there's nothing that shields us from the entire range of human emotion and experience. Like we're all
Yes.
going to have the whole thing.
That's exactly right. And I think, again, people look at other people and see something that they want, or that they're going after, or that's part of their goal. And they think because that person has it, that person has no more goals, right? Or that person doesn't have trouble. I can tell you, every single person I look at that I consider to be like very high performing, very high achiever, every one of them has something that they're battling. So every one of them has something that they want to fix. No one is living the let's say stress-free lifestyle. It's not reality.
Yeah, it's the human condition. They're still human.
Yes.
Right? This
Yeah.
is
No,
part of
and
being,
life can be boring. Yeah,
yeah,
if you don't have goals and things that you're
right.
going after, no matter what your age, like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, I agree. I agree. My husband is a bit older than I am, and he and I have been talking about if he's going to retire. And he looked at me the other day and he said, I don't know what I would do with myself. Like, I have things I want to do in my work. Why would I retire? And I was like, great, keep working. That's
Yes.
fun. If it feels fulfilling for him. And just like you said, no matter what your age is, if you have goals and things you want to do, and he's a research scientist, so it's great to see like he still has things he wants to research, and he's still getting grants and still doing it. So, why?
Without a doubt. I
Yeah.
mean, you could have a love of golf, right? And the next chapter for you is to improve your handicap or whatever that may be. I was speaking to a woman last week, and she still rides side by sides in Colorado, and has a whole bunch of really awesome things that she creates in regards to adventures. And she has 10 grandchildren and 4 children that are grown and out of the house. She is not letting the grass grow under her feet. She finds not just career goals, but other things outside of her career that she wants to do, and she's going to go do it. And I think that's awesome. I think everybody needs that.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. So I want to come back to your 4 F's, because the other one that I really see connecting to the work that we do and to mindfulness in general is fraternity. So a lot of research on meditation and mindfulness integrates things like empathy, compassion, and community, right? Practicing in community. And personally, that's one of the things that feels, I don't know, like it's just a beautiful aspect of practice that uplifts me, that brings me joy, that brings me a sense of connection and solidarity, and yeah, and I don't know how to describe it, but there's some quality to, for example, doing a loving kindness meditation that makes me happy to be part of the world, that when I'm listening to the news, for example, I might not feel. So I don't know if you could say something about what led you to add fraternity and what that means for you, and yeah, and connections that you might see.
Yeah, in the business side of me won't. I don't think I'll ever be able to flush it away, nor do I ever want to. So fraternity is your relationships, right? And as a person that was going after a career and wealth creation and all of those things, a lot of, let's say, my fraternity or my contacts were very business focused and not maybe as personal focused as they should have been. And so that's a place that I did a decent amount of work in trying to figure out how do we define the people that we spend our time with? How do we understand how often should we be talking to them and who's actually really important. So I created a methodology called the Relate Matrix, which measures the depth of the people that you're putting in your let's say your world or your sphere, and then the transparency and communication that you have with them. And so if you picture the depth being on the y-axis and transparency being along the x-axis, as you plot out all the people in your life, when you draw a radius around those connecting points, you come up with a frequency, how often you should be talking with those folks. And so this helps when I have conversations with people who have like a sales career or a customer service career, where they say, "Hey, I want to have this stranger become someone who is an acquaintance of mine, or I want to have a closer relationship." You can't move up more than a one tick in regards to your depth, but it'll also give you a hint at how often you should be reaching out to that person or how often you should be talking with them. I think, interestingly enough, in your personal relationships, there's certain people that I find that you think should be in your list, but you never talk to them, right? And you never really want to talk to them. And so it really creates some clarity for me on who I want to talk to, who I want in my contact list, and if I'm giving them the care and feeding that I should, right? And we always talk about, if you want to own a relationship or you want to have a relationship with someone, you've got to own it 100% you, 0% them. And so when you start to look at this list, are these people worth 100% of your effort? Right, and you need to expect nothing back from them. And so that's what fraternity is to me. The human mind can really only manage a maximum of 150 contacts. So that doesn't sound like a lot until you start to plot it on this graph, and then all of a sudden, when you look at your intention and your effort, it becomes clear on who you value.
I love this idea of 100% you, 0% them. Like, that's so altruistic, right? Like, you
Yeah.
actually are not pursuing that relationship because you think you're going to receive something. You're pursuing the relationship to be in relationship.
Yes, without a doubt. And it takes off so many layers of stress, at least for me, when I started to look at it that way, right? Having no expectation of what that person's going to do. Just believe it or not, it releases a lot of stress. You'd think it was the exact opposite, but it really isn't. If I don't expect anything back from you, but I want to have a relationship, like, what I do is like makes sense to me.
Yeah, I love your phrase, the care and feeding, right? The care and
Hmm.
feeding. It speaks to my inner Italian grandma. I always feel like I channel my Italian grandma and I want to like feed and love on everyone the way she did. She was this amazing cook who used to just feed us all constantly. But yeah, that really makes my heart happy to hear you frame it like that. And yeah, and I've never thought of mapping out my relationship, so that's an interesting thing to think about.
Well, part of that, though, it creates some really interesting dynamics too. So I always look at it almost like in sports. There are franchise contacts and there are seasonal contacts, right? So there are people who will be in your life for as long as they're alive or as long as you are alive. Those are franchise contacts. Seasonal, or some people just they come and then they go, right? And I find that if I only have one affinity with you, right? Maybe we work at the same office. The minute you leave the company or I leave the company, that affinity is gone and that relationship is broken. if I have more than one affinity with you, we could leave companies, but we still have other things that connect us, that keep you in communication or in a relationship. And that, what I find, starts to define who becomes a franchise versus a seasonal seasonal contact for me. And it's been hugely impactful, right? Seeing that, or giving permission for people to come and go and not feel animosity about it, right? I'm not upset. Like I think about my last organization, we had a decent amount of employees that half of them, I don't even remember their names. It's awful to say, but I don't. And it's because we only had one affinity. It was the business.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was a K to 12 teacher for many years, and I had every single year between 200 and 300 students, right, that I saw. Um, there's no way that I can remember all of those kiddos, right? You just the volume of people that you come in contact with in general is too high. It's just too high. Even in this job, I meet people constantly, and I feel bad. I wish I could have a deep connection with every single person, but I can't, right? And we all have
That's right.
limited resources of time and energy and all of that. So I think being selective but then diving deep really makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, and I think understanding that flow helps you appreciate those relationships, whether they are franchise and with you forever or seasonal, right? It's just the natural flow. And again, understanding that you really only have the ability to maintain or manage 150,
Yeah,
it shows the need for many of the contacts to just be seasonal.
yeah,
Doesn't mean they're not worth it. Doesn't mean, like, your students, right? You probably
yeah,
loved on them and helped them, and you wanted them to develop. But at the end of the school year, Nanny McPhee roles, right? They may feel like they need you, but they really don't need you anymore. So they move on, and you're comfortable with that.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about the work you do around leadership, because we've been kind of circling that. All of this is part of that, right? And I
Yep.
know when we think of leadership, a lot of times we think of business leaders, COO, CEO, the whole C-suite thing. But we have a lot of, like, I work with community leaders all the time that are doing great work in community that may not have that title. Um, I wonder if you have any kind of, we talked about vulnerability, like any advice for folks on how to really develop themselves as a leader, but keep that vulnerability and being open.
Oh my gosh, yes. I would say the first thing is something I call the fixed agenda experience. As a leader, I think you really got to work hard for no surprises with the people that you're working with, or the people that are working for you. So the idea that every meeting that they come to, they understand what it's going to be about, and they're not going to be surprised when you at times have to talk about tough subjects, as well as celebrate the great wins. I think for me, really understanding now that to build a great culture, whether it's as a community or in a company itself, it's not having those conversations at a even keel, right? You think about the best relationships that you have in your life, guaranteed they're the best relationships because you've celebrated some really great highs, and you've had some really, really heated arguments, right? That's what, like, drives that relationship, and really makes it, more impactful and more valuable for you. So I would say, first and foremost, making sure that you set yourself up to allow people to recognize that there's going to be some conversations at times, because we built an agenda where we're going to talk about some tough stuff. That's probably number one. Number two is, I think you got to be really, really intentional about what you're going after, and you got to set some processes in place to allow you to judge and see how well you're doing with what I call intensity, right? So for me, it's every week I do this thing I call a halftime report, right? Half, again, here's another acronym, HAF, right? what hurdles did I run into, and how did I, go after those hurdles? What ahas like happened? What epiphanies happened during the week? And what fixes am I going to put in place to actually correct, some things that I probably don't want to repeat ever again? I think that's a big one. And then um, I think what's kind of neat is at the end of every month, whether you're doing it for yourself or for your team, is to do a quick evaluation, and I call it a map, right? So assess the last 30 days. How do you rate your mindset, both personally and professionally, when you were going after whatever the goal was for the community or for the business? Um, did you have the ability to do the things you needed to do? And by ability, did you have the proper team, tools, and training? And then finally, how do you rate your performance? And performance, I could talk forever about that. But for me, the big thing about when you set a performance or a target, the goal has to be clear. You have to be able to, whether it's you or the person that you're working with, you have to have some sort of report to measure how well you're doing. Um, was it actionable? Meaning, did you have the ability to affect or go after and hit that goal, or is there somebody in your way or some sort of thing that needs to get done before you can actually hit that goal? And then finally, is it relevant? When you think about a community or for a business, is it actually helping the business create more value, or are you reducing some risks or some variables in the business to make it more valuable? If it's not relevant, but it seems like a good goal, you can't have that as your performance goal. I think it's so important for whether you're a leader or your folks that you're leading to know at the end of every day whether they should give themselves a high five or a swift kick in the butt, because they know they're either driving value for the community and the organization, or they're reducing it because they didn't hit their goals.
Yeah, we recently had a board retreat, and one of the folks at one of my board members works with companies as a consultant, and he was saying people don't always understand that a person who is kind of mediocre and not really performing actually does more damage to a team than a high performing inspirational person does good. Like there's some research on
Yes.
that. So I love being able to have those honest conversations and identify, like very clearly on a regular basis, kind of like fast failing, right? Um, like this is
Yeah.
working,
Well,
this
and
isn't working.
the other thing I find with that too, though, is sometimes the high performers, and again, I focus a good deal of my work on high achievers. We
Yeah,
we as leaders at times feel like it's okay to go past that. They know they're doing a great job. I don't need to do an evaluation with them. I don't need to sit down with them at the end of every month and have a conversation because they're killing it. That's another thing that can very quickly hurt your business or hurt your community, because that high achiever needs to be heard,
yeah,
right? They need to be told they did a good job. They may
yeah,
have something that's going on in their personal life that they want to lean on you to help. And,
yeah.
and you can't, so often I find leaders will focus on the weed in the organization, the one that needs plucked and kicked out the door. And they feel like, hey, that high achiever already knows I like them and they're doing a great job. They don't need any support. They absolutely need support. They need more
I love
support
it.
than the person you're getting ready to get rid of.
Yeah, that's great. Well, coming to the end here, David, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you really, really wanted to make sure to say on the podcast or that you'd like to share?
The only thing, and I already said it once, but I think it needs to be said again, is, if you're a high achiever, and if you're someone who's out there that is, just smashing all of the metrics that people put in front of you, whether you're a student or an executive or whomever, uh, understand it's okay that you're going to have dark days, right? Understand that you feeling imposter syndrome, you're not alone. We all do, right? And I would really encourage you to get with a community of folks just like you to realize that that those feelings are normal, right? That you're not alone, you're not abnormal, but you definitely need support. Even if you're killing it, you need support. And if you have someone in your life that's a straight A student or killing it or sold a bazillion businesses and driving a McLaren and looking like they're living their best life ever, take some time to ask them how they're doing and truly mean it.
I love that. I love it. That's great. Great thing to end on. But I will ask you one other question. Do you have any, because I ask everyone this to end our show, do you have a favorite resource, mindfulness related, that you want to share with our listeners?
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, I would say for me it's journaling, right? It's being able to make sure you set aside just a quick portion of your day to write out your thoughts. Many times if they're negative thoughts, to contain them on paper gives you a really great way to release them. And many times it's amazing. It's when you're writing them down, they don't seem like they have any relevance or meaning to you whatsoever. But if you go back and reflect a few days ahead, it's amazing the little nuggets of information that you can get to kind of move forward in a better way, in the future.
And I will give the shameless plug to your book. So if you're interested in exploring F4, his model that he talked about on the podcast here, he does have the book available. So we'll put a link to that in the notes here so that people can explore it. And also, if you're a high achiever that would like to be in community with others that are feeling and experiencing stress or difficulty, David is also hosting that community in his online community. So we'll put a link to that as well. Any last nugget for everyone, David, as we wrap it up?
No, that was awesome. I really appreciate your time.
No, thank you. It was really wonderful to deepen the relationship with you and put a little of that mojo into our relationship and building that.
I love it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Say Something Studios.